As we move through the top 30 wide receiver rankings for week 1 fantasy football, it's going to be important to remember two things in particular. Number one is these rankings are going to look different from my preseason top 30 or 36 wide receiver rankings because that applies for the entire season. And the second thing to keep in mind is week 1 is always the hardest week to predict in fantasy football. So we're moving through the top 30 wide receiver rankings today, and I'm doing everything I can to get us ready. So please go down there, drop a like on the video, and subscribe to the channel to show your support. So this first tier of guys right here, they're going to look all very familiar. I've got Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, Tyreek Hill is taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I think this is going to be, if not the highest scoring matchup of the week, I think it'll be one of the highest. Neither one of these teams has a really solid defense. So I think this game has a seriously high potential to be absolutely ridiculously high scoring. The only thing that's cause for concern right now is Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who we'll get to in a little bit, currently dealing with injuries right now, and Tyreek Hill has not practiced as of recently. So it's going to be really interesting, and we're going to have to watch this one, obviously, through the week. But obviously, if he comes back and if he's going to play, you play Tyreek Hill, and he's my favorite this week. Now, with CeeDee Lamb here against the Browns in Cleveland this week, I do think it's important to note one particular thing about this CeeDee Lamb situation, which is that if you're playing football on ESPN, it's showing that he's out for week 1. Obviously, that's cause for major concern. This is why ESPN is just not the best fantasy football platform. He is going to play week 1. The only reason he was ruled out on ESPN is because the Dallas Cowboys actually were able to put him on the team exempt list for the first 2 weeks while they negotiated a deal. Well, obviously, he signed a deal, so he's going to be ready to go. No reason to sit CeeDee Lamb. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think if it's not the Jags versus the Dolphins at the high-scoring game, could very well be the Detroit Lions versus the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, we know Amon-Ra St. Brown's role is set in stone. This defense is good, the Los Angeles Rams are, but I do think that it's not good enough to stop one of the best offenses in football. All these guys are in the same tier because you could rank them really how you want to, especially with Tyreek Hill being injured. But I prefer those three in this particular order here. Now, the next tier right here we're dropping down to started out by Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase. Ja'Marr Chase at 4, taking on the New England Patriots, is the reason he's above Justin Jefferson this week. Now, obviously, it's all dependent on if he signs a contract / plays in week 1. So here's the timeline of events that have happened in the last couple of weeks. So Ja'Marr Chase has really held in for most of training camp for the Cincinnati Bengals. The most recent timeline is this, though. Ja'Marr Chase returns to practice, and head coach Zach Taylor says, yeah, we're expecting Ja'Marr Chase to play in week 1. Then the next day, he misses practice. Zach Taylor comes out again and says, I probably misspoke earlier than I should have. And ever since then, Ja'Marr Chase is not exactly back at practice, and there's no deal in place as of the time of this filming. So obviously, one to watch, but if he plays, I like him against the New England Patriots, who I think are just not going to be a very good team this year, and I think Ja'Marr Chase has a chance to be great this year. And then with Justin Jefferson against the Giants in New York, it's really what kind of bumps him up a little bit for me. Obviously, with Justin Jefferson, he's going to do his thing this year. But of course, with Sam Darnold, it's going to limit his upside that he had with Kirk Cousins. He doesn't have wide receiver 1 upside in fantasy football this year, in my opinion. But he's such an elite player that can perform with dysfunction, I think, that he's still going to be a top 5 guy this week, especially against the Giants, who I don't believe have a bad defense, but I do believe the Vikings will win this game pretty decidedly. Now, to round out this tier, I've got Nico Collins at 6. AJ Brown at 7, and Mike Evans at 8, and also Garrett Wilson at 9. So with Nico Collins, this kind of the start of what I said earlier in the video, which is that you need to realize that these week 1 rankings are going to look different from the season-long rankings that I did. With Nico Collins against the Indianapolis Colts, I think the Houston Texans get off to a hot start. Not only are they going to be more reliant than I think they want to be on the passing game, because Joe Mixon basically missed all of the offseason, and Cam Akers is the running back too. I think that Nico Collins, like I said, I've made it clear I think he's a wide receiver 1, and it's not really a question. So I think that in this divisional matchup, it's always tougher to predict, but Nico Collins, I'm kind of banking on him having a big week this week because I think the Texans are going to come out strong right away against a divisional opponent. And then number 7, AJ Brown versus the Green Bay Packers gets a little bit of a bump down. The reason he's not over Nico, and maybe even over Justin Jefferson, is not because we don't expect him to phase out of the game at some point. It's not that. I think Kellen Moore's going to get him the ball. It's really a matter of him going up against Jair Alexander. Jair Alexander will follow A.J. Brown throughout this game, and Jair Alexander has been known to give wide receivers fits in the NFC. So I think Jair Alexander's still great. There's no reason to believe that he's not. So I think A.J. Brown just might be a little capped. That's why he's at 7. Now with Mike Evans, this is kind of my big prediction of the week. I think Mike Evans comes out really hot this week. Mike Evans taking on the Washington Commanders in week 1. The Washington Commanders who they have not looked good defensively over the last couple of years. I don't really love what their secondary looks like right now. And Mike Evans coming out with Baker Mayfield, I think could have a 2-touchdown game in this particular week, which is why when I look at his line on Underdog, he's actually boosted by 1.22 times to get over 0.5 reception touchdowns. I would take the higher on that, and I would even take the higher on 67.5 receiving yards. So if you do want to get in on the Mike Evans line this week, use that link in the comments below. And when you use code FFN to sign up for Underdog and deposit at least $10, not only will they give you a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 in bonus cash, but you'll also be able to take advantage of this free pick this week, Travis Kelce getting more than half a yard. Obviously, that's a smash pick, so if you want to get in on Underdog today, use code FFN to do it. And then to round out the tier, Garrett Wilson against the 49ers this week. I think they're going to lose against the 49ers in San Francisco on Monday night, but I think it ultimately doesn't really matter this year for Garrett Wilson because as long as Rodgers is healthy, Wilson's going to get peppered with targets. So I think that Garrett Wilson, as an individual player, is elite enough to have basically a really consistent fantasy season. And I think we'll kind of see that come to fruition against the 49ers, who I expect to be a much more improved defense than what they were last year. And I think that Garrett Wilson is just in line for a 10-target game, and we'll kind of see it right away. Really, it comes down to how efficient Rodgers and him are to start the season. That's why I've got him actually a little bit lower than I might at some point in the later coming weeks. Now, jumping down to our next tier here, we've got Puka Nacua at 10 and Chris Olave at 11. Now, again, Puka Nacua is in this really potentially high-scoring matchup against the Detroit Lions in Detroit, and Puka Nacua, from everything that I've seen, looks ready to go. Reports are that he's completely ready to go. He's not going to be limited at all this week. So obviously they maintained his injury correctly over the offseason. Now, I did read that, this could be something that lingers, which is cause for concern for sure. But in this high of a upside of a matchup, and just knowing that Puka Nacua is a good player, I don't really have many reservations putting him at number 10, although it's clear why there's a tier break between him and Garrett Wilson in particular, because there is more doubt with Puka this week than I have with Garrett Wilson. And then with Chris Olave here, really gets boosted by taking on the Panthers. That's kind of where I'm at with Chris Olave. Like, even if he takes on J.C. Horn the entire day at the cornerback position for Carolina, Olave is going to get peppered with targets. We know that. And I think this is one of those games that, even though it is a divisional game, I think the Saints end up winning this game. And Chris Olave is obviously, if not their most important, their second most important piece on offense. So just based on matchup alone against the Panthers, he's kind of boosted over Marvin Harrison Jr. at 12. Marvin Harrison Jr., I've got him ranked inside the top 12 in his first ever NFL game against the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo this week. I think that Marvin Harrison Jr. comes out ready to go. The one thing that actually concerns me with the Bills' defense is their secondary. And with Marvin Harrison Jr., he's looking like a player that is just, I've said it all offseason, just a pro-ready prospect. And the thing about pro-ready receiving prospects that are elite, like him and Malik Neighbors in Rome Odunze, for example, is Malik Neighbors is a perfect example. Most of these guys are not getting great quarterbacks. And I'm not saying Kyler's great, but Kyler is definitely above average, and he's definitely a very good quarterback. So I think that it clicks week one. I don't think there's any growing pains here. I'm ready to play Marvin Harrison Jr. And then to round out this tier, Rashee Rice coming up on Thursday night at 13, DJ Moore at 14, and Jalen Waddle at 15. Rashee Rice, I think his breakout campaign starts on Thursday night against the Baltimore Ravens. Rashee Rice has been actively rising in fantasy drafts, and the only reason he was that low, obviously, was because of fear of suspension. Big news this week, Rashee Rice is not going to be placed on the commissioner exempt list. Roger Goodell came out and said that. So essentially what this means for people who are worried about Rashee Rice is until this legal situation is figured out, he's not getting a suspension, and he's not going to miss time. And the legal case is going to take place the court date in like 2025. So Rashee Rice is good this year. And I think it immediately starts against the Ravens. I think there's going to be fireworks in this game, and I think Rashee Rice is going to be a massive part of it this week against the Baltimore Ravens. Now, DJ Moore at 14 against the Tennessee Titans. He's a little bit down for me this week. I wish I could put him higher. I think it'll be a little bit of an adjustment period with him and a rookie quarterback. I'm not saying Caleb Williams is going to have a bad game. I'm just saying that with 2 and 3 good wide receiver options here, maybe we don't see DJ Moore immediately have that upside we saw last year with Caleb. By week like 6 or 7, like DJ Moore's all likely going to be higher than this. And Tennessee's defense, I will say, him going against L'Jarius Sneed also factors into this. Tennessee's defense is not like it has been in years past in the secondary. They got rid of Caleb Farley. Their number 1 corner is L'Jarius Sneed. He will follow DJ Moore in all likelihood, so that also contributes to it as well. Jalen Waddle, same situation as Tyreek, man. He's questionable, and he's been dealing with an undisclosed injury we don't know much about for the last like 3 or 4 weeks. So if he plays, I want in. Because like I said, I think this matchup is going to be so high flying. But at the same time, man, Jalen Waddle does worry me. And if he wasn't dealing with an injury, he'd probably be over Chris Olave at 11. But since he's dealing with injury right now, I'm worried about his start to the season. And obviously, we need to know if he's going to play or not. So it's all dependent on if he plays. But if he does, I've got him here at 15. And to start out this next tier right here, I've got Michael Pittman Jr. at 16 and Devonta Smith at 17. Now, with Michael Pittman Jr. taking on the Texans here, he's obviously the wide receiver 1. There's no question about that in Indianapolis. What it really comes down to is I have no idea how Anthony Richardson is going to look right now. I really don't know. He could be really, really good, or he could be pretty bad. Like, his variance of outcomes is actually really wide for me in week 1, especially against a divisional opponent and against a strong defense like Houston. And again, Michael Pittman Jr. is going to be taking on Derek Stingley at the quarterback position. So, not that Michael Pittman's a bad receiver, but I think that Stingley is probably a better corner than Michael Pittman is a receiver. So he's dropped a little bit for me. I'll have him higher in other weeks, but right now I've got him at 16. And then with Devonta Smith here, he's probably my favorite wide receiver too outside of Jalen Waddle this week. Devonta Smith against the Packers, I think has a lot of potential. And also, the boost also comes from Jair Alexander more than likely following A.J. Brown, leaving Devonta Smith a little bit more freed up with their second corner, Eric Stokes. So Devonta Smith, I think, has a good shot to be a really good week 1 play. Very similar to last year, how Devonta Smith started out hotter than A.J. Brown. I think Devonta Smith has a chance to get off to that start, but of course I'm ranking A.J. Brown over him. And then to round out this tier right here, Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel at 18 and 19. Now with Cooper Kupp, this high-flying matchup against Detroit, honestly, there's a case to be made that he should be higher, and I would listen to it. Cooper Kupp, especially if Puka is not at 100%, Cooper Kupp will probably rise up to a top 12 guy. I just worry with Cooper Kupp, obviously his age and his injury history, so I want to see it a little bit first before I rank him a little bit higher, but obviously this matchup has tons of upside. And the other thing that worries me is Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford has not exactly been a super clean bill of health throughout his career and this offseason as well. So I just kind of want to take a little bit of a wait and see approach with these Rams wide receivers. And then with Deebo at number 19 against the Jets, he's one of the hardest players to rank in fantasy. My guess here this week against the Jets is he'll be prioritized between him and Ayuk, because Ayuk basically missed the entire offseason, and Ayuk is it just was a rocky situation there in San Francisco. So I'm just kind of betting that Deebo is more involved right away, and Deebo is going to be the guy that I prefer out of the San Francisco wide receiver room in week 1. Now dropping down to the next tier right here, Devontae Adams is at 20. And Drake London is at 21. I'm sure a lot of people have been wondering where these two guys were, and I'll explain it to you why I have them lower probably than most people do this week. Devontae Adams against the Chargers here. Not only do I think the Chargers defense is really good, and not only do I think that Devontae Adams' quarterback situation is not good with Gardner Minshew, one thing that's running rampant right now in NFL news world is Devontae Adams actively wanting to get out. Team reports are predicting trades. Former players are saying yeah, he's not happy there. So it's this is going to become a mess, I think. I think Devontae Adams is an elite wide receiver talent that we've seen in the last 10 years. So I like him over a guy like Drake London this week. But man, I got to tell you, this situation has potential to blow up. And this week against the Chargers might be the start of actually what we see on TV. Now with Drake London here against the Steelers, Joey Porter Jr. is going to be a good corner this year, so I do factor that into it. But really the ultimate problem with me, and like I've been saying all offseason, I need to see it first. I need to see it first. With Drake London, everybody's relying on Kirk Cousins being the guy he used to be. Number one, he's 35, 36 years old, and is coming off an Achilles tear. That's not really a good thing for immobile quarterbacks to do. Now, the other thing is, I think they'll be run first this year. Now, with that said, Drake London will be the number one in this offense. I don't have a problem saying that as a number one target. But Drake London, I just need to see it first. We have not seen a dramatic level of upside that people are predicting this year. So I'm just not in the camp that's ready ready to call the breakout. I need to see it first. And then T. Higgins at 22 and Stephon Diggs at 23 round this tier out. Both wide receiver twos, and T. Higgins is going up against the New England Patriots. If Jamar misses, he obviously rises a lot higher. I think T. Higgins could have a monster week. And it really just kind of comes back to what I think about T ultimately this year, which is I think he has potential for a monster season this year. He's going into a contract year with a good quarterback, Joe Burrow. So I think that T. Higgins actually has a lot of upside in fantasy this year. And I think we start to see it week one in New England. Either way, whether Jamar plays or not. But obviously if Jamar plays, he's going to rise quite a bit. And then Stephon Diggs at 23 against the Indianapolis Colts. I prefer him over Tank this particular week. And I say this particular week because this could change really, really fast. Like for me this week was Stephon Diggs. I think that based on what we saw from the preseason and what we have seen from every report available and every metric available, Stephon Diggs will be on the field more than Tank Dell will be. So I just think based on that, like we have to predict that he has more upside in fantasy in week one than Tank Dell does. And again, I'm very happy to rank Tank Dell over Stephon Diggs later if we see it. But as of what we've seen so far, I think it's more responsible to rank Stephon Diggs at this spot rather than Tank Dell at this spot. Now dropping down to our next tier right here. Brandon Ayuk, Amari Cooper started out with 24 and 25. And like I said, I think that Ayuk is obviously still a really good player. Like he's a great player that I think he'll have an impact week one. Obviously they wouldn't sign him to that amount of money if they didn't think he was going to have an impact on basically every single game. So I think he will have an impact. The problem I ultimately have with Ayuk is, again, this situation dragged out for so long. Not only did he miss a lot of time, it got ugly between these two teams. So hopefully they mended fences, obviously, but my gut just tells me I would rather go with Debo this week if I had both of them on my team. So I would say Brandon Ayuk at 24 is more appropriate for me. Now, Amari Cooper at 25 against the Dallas Cowboys. Amari Cooper has also had a little bit of a weird offseason. Quietly so. Like, his name was included in the potential trade for Brandon Ayuk. And he wasn't exactly thrilled, but he wasn't like, oh, this is crazy. Like, he was like, oh, I wouldn't mind leaving. So, Amari Cooper with the Browns is a little bit sketchy right now, and Deshaun Watson scares me too. So, I just struggle to put Amari Cooper higher, even though I know that he should be higher just based on how he's done with the Browns and how he's done with every other team, basically. Amari Cooper can hit big, and he could easily hit big this week. He's very boomer bust, but right now, the vibes just aren't good for me. Same with Brandon Ayuk. And then at 26 and 27 here, Malik Neighbors and Terry McLaurin. So Malik Neighbors at 26 against the Minnesota Vikings. I want to rank Malik Neighbors higher. I really do. But with Malik Neighbors, again, I think that with Daniel Jones in particular, I think it starts out really, really rough. I don't think this has a pretty start. So I think this is one that probably needs time to gel. And Malik Neighbors obviously is not going to struggle for targets, but he is going to struggle with a bad quarterback. And Minnesota's defense is not one to slouch. It's not one to scoff at. Minnesota's defense is run by Brian Flores. This is a really good defensive culture here. So I do think that ultimately Malik Neighbors will probably struggle in his first week of action in the NFL, but I do think that he ultimately does have upside because he is the team's clear wide receiver one. And Terry McLaurin, it feels so weird to have him in here because I am This has never been a big Terry McLaurin guy. This year's different, though. Not only is he the clear number one with Jahan Dotson got, but he's also, I think, going to be playing with the best quarterback in his career by far. Terry McLaurin gets Jaden Daniels, and against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week, a little bit of a tougher defense, and I also do think that it's going to be a slower process to get Jaden Daniels to be really good. Obviously, I don't think he comes out right away and just like lights it up with Terry McLaurin. So I think he's down here at 27 appropriately because the target share is going to be there in week 1, but I don't think the upside is going to be there quite as high as it will be by like week 6 or 7. Now, dropping down to the last tier right here. To round it all out, I've got Keenan Allen at 28, Calvin Ridley at 29, and Jaden Reed at 30. Keenan Allen is here for the early part of the season, and I expect him to be here for the early part of the season. Keenan Allen, I've said it on wide receiver rankings videos, I think Keenan starts the year as the wide receiver 2, and as time goes on, Rome Odunze does overtake him at some point. I think this week, with Keenan Allen, there could be particular upside because I do think that DJ Moore will be covered by L'Jarius Sneed the most of the time. So Keenan Allen, I think this week could have a pretty decent week. He's actually got a lot more upside than this, but based on how I feel about this Bears situation, Keenan Allen inside the top 30 at the beginning of the season is not something that is an outrageous thing that people should think about. Calvin Ridley at 29 against the Bears, wide receiver 1 by far in Tennessee. It ultimately just comes down to Will Levis. I don't know how to predict this offense yet. I don't. I've talked about them as a sleeper offense all offseason. I'm ultimately still undecided on how I truly think it's going to go. Week 1's going to go a long way. The Bears defense is tough, but if we see some sliver of upside, I think a lot of it does go to Calvin Ridley because he will get 8 to 9 targets in this game, and I do expect Calvin Ridley to be the wide receiver 1 by far in this Tennessee offense. And then rounding it out at 30, Jaden Reed is the preferred guy for me in Green Bay. It's going to be difficult, very similar to Deebo Samuel, to project Jaden Reed's week-to-week upside because he will get carries and he will get targets. And against the Eagles defense, I like them, but I think the Packers offense is just elite. So I think that Jaden Reed is going to be a massive playmaker all season for the Packers, so I'll probably consistently pick him as the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay. But this week against the Eagles, I don't know how it's going to go yet, so I'm undecided. That's why I've got him at 30. And at the end of every single ranking video, I will give you what I call my Underdog pick of the week, which is particularly ideal for weekly best ball drafts in Underdog. So, for example, this weekend you can get into the Sunday main slate or some of the primetime games, and you could do a best ball draft. And my favorite wide receiver pick on Underdog this week for those drafts is Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals. So first of all, Michael Wilson is not on people's minds. Since Marvin Harrison Jr. is there in Arizona and Trey McBride is thought to be the consensus number 2 weapon, the second-year wide receiver who actually did really well last year in some points, he's being totally left out of people's minds. So you can guarantee that he's going to be basically undrafted this week in best ball weekly tournaments on Underdog. So this is a guy against the Bills, like I said again, I think that the Arizona Cardinals could come out and make this a little bit of a shootout this week. And with the second-year wide receiver against the Buffalo defense that I don't think is particularly strong on the back end, I think the Cardinals have a decent chance to make this a shootout, and Michael Wilson will play a part in this offense. So let me know what you think of the rankings for this week in the comments below, and if you want to see the best waiver wire pickups to make before week 1, click on this video right here.